It was just a black and white photo, tucked away in a box with other forgotten things. Nothing special, really. Just another face from the past. The year was 1902, and the subject was a young woman, maybe in her late teens or early 20s. She sat there, very still, in a stiff, formal pose. Her expression was neutral, almost blank, which was pretty normal for photos from that time. People didn't smile much for the camera back then. The picture itself was small, a little faded around the edges, and it had been picked up at a small auction, part of an estate sale. Just a common personal memento, probably of someone's grandmother or great-aunt. That's what everyone thought anyway. It was charming, sure, but nothing that would make you look twice. It was just an old photo, but then something tiny started to show itself. A flicker, almost. If you held the photo just right, under a certain light, and really looked close, you might see it. A subtle bulge, a slight unevenness under the fabric of her left sleeve. It was so small, so faint, that it was easy to miss. Most people did. The first time someone noticed it, they just brushed it off. Probably a trick of the light, they thought, or maybe just a wrinkle in her dress. Old photos often had little imperfections after all, so the picture was filed away with a bunch of other historical odds and ends. Its little quirk was noted, but nobody really bothered to check it out further. It just sat there, waiting. Years passed. The photo stayed in its box, moving from one collection to another, always just another piece of history. Then, during a massive inventory of the collection, it resurfaced. A new curator, a young woman named Clara, was going through the old files. She picked up the photo, curious about the stiff formality of the woman in the picture, and that's when she saw it, the same subtle anomaly, that tiny bulge under the sleeve. It caught her eye, and this time, it didn't feel like a trick of the light. It felt deliberate. Clara found herself staring at it for a long time. There was something about it that just didn't sit right. A quiet unease started to build in her mind. It wasn't just a wrinkle. It was too perfectly placed, too distinct. She tried to make it disappear by moving the photo, but it stayed there, stubborn and clear. The more she looked, the more she felt this strange pull, this sense that something was off. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic feeling, but a slow, creeping certainty that this ordinary photo held a secret. It was strong enough that she couldn't just put it back in the box and forget about it. She decided then that this photo, unlike the others, deserved a closer look. It needed more than just a quick glance. There was an unshakable feeling that something was amiss, something hidden beneath the surface of that dated image. This wasn't just a simple portrait anymore. It was a puzzle. The first step was to get a better look, a really good look. The photo was carefully taken to the digital lab. It went under a high-resolution scanner, the kind that picks up every tiny detail. As the image appeared on the screen, blown up many times its original size, the subtle bulge under the sleeve was no longer subtle. It was clear, very clear. It wasn't a fabric fold at all. It was a distinct shape, something solid. It looked almost metallic, or at least had a texture that wasn't soft like cloth. And then another detail jumped out. The woman's hand, partly hidden by the sleeve, wasn't just resting there. It looked like she was clenching it, grasping something tightly. The team working with Clara started talking, throwing out ideas. What could it be? A hidden trinket, a piece of jewelry, maybe some kind of small personal item she didn't want to show? Someone even suggested it might be a photographic trick or some accidental smudge that just looked like something. But the more they zoomed in, the less likely those ideas seemed. The object under her sleeve was definitely there, definitely not a smudge, and the woman's pose, which had seemed stiff and formal before, suddenly looked different. Now, with the hidden object in mind, her rigidity seemed less about posing for a camera and more about holding something still, something important. A sense of mystery started to grow around the picture. What was she holding? Why was it hidden? The object's nature remained elusive, making everyone more curious. Clara knew they needed more. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was bigger than just a hidden locket. So she took the digital images to Dr. Aris Thorne, a specialist in photographic restoration. Dr. Thorne was known for his sharp eye and his ability to see things others missed in old photographs. He put the image on his own high-res screen, adjusted the settings, and leaned in close. He spent a long time just looking, his brow furrowed in thought. Finally, he sat back. "It's definitely there," he said, his voice low. "No digital anomaly. It's a physical object, under the fabric, without a doubt." He confirmed that it wasn't a trick of light or a flaw in the old film. "And," he added, "the way she's holding her hand, she's gripping it tight." He then suggested something that made Clara's heart beat a little faster. "We should try some non-invasive imaging, X-ray, maybe infrared. That should tell us what's really going on under there." The mystery was deepening, and Clara felt a mix of excitement and a strange, cold dread. The suggestion for advanced imaging was exactly what Clara needed to hear. It meant they were moving beyond speculation and into tangible investigation. "Doctor," Thorne's confirmation that the object was real, not a photographic fluke, solidified her conviction. There was definitely something there, and the woman in the photo was definitely holding it. The next step was to see through the fabric, to peek into the past in a way that wasn't possible with just a magnifying glass or a digital zoom. The old photograph, now treated with a reverence usually reserved for ancient relics, was carefully moved to a specialized lab. It was placed under an X-ray machine first. The process was slow and precise, designed to capture every hidden detail without damaging the fragile emulsion. When the first X-ray image appeared on the screen, it was like looking at a ghost. The dress, the woman's skin, her hair, they all faded into transparency. But the object under her sleeve, previously just a vague bulge, now stood out with stark clarity. It wasn't soft, it wasn't round, it wasn't a locket or a simple piece of jewelry. The X-ray image provided a skeletal outline of something small, yes, but also incredibly intricate. There were distinct lines, tiny points, and overlapping shapes that suggested a complex internal structure. It looked mechanical, almost like a miniature engine or a very elaborate watch, but not quite either. The details were too sharp, too deliberate to be accidental. Next came the infrared imaging. This technique works by detecting heat signatures and different material densities, often revealing layers or substances invisible to the naked eye. The infrared scan added another dimension to their understanding. It hinted at various materials, some denser than others, within the object. There was a subtle glow in certain areas, suggesting metal components, while other parts seemed to be made of a different, perhaps organic material. The combined data from both imaging techniques started to paint a clearer, more detailed picture. The object was definitely taking form. It was indeed mechanical, with delicate components and what looked like precise construction. You could almost make out tiny gears, springs and levers, all packed together in a very confined space. Its size suggested it was small enough to be concealed by the sleeve, yet substantial enough to create the visible bulge. It wasn't flat, it had depth and dimension, and the woman's grip on it, which had been hinted at by the digital magnification, was now clearly discernible. Her fingers were wrapped tightly around it, almost possessively. It wasn't a gentle hold, it looked like she was making sure it wouldn't slip away, or perhaps that no one could take it from her. As the image of the hidden object became clearer, a growing unease settled over the team. This wasn't what they expected. The nature of the object didn't align with any common personal items from that era. It was far too complex for a mere trinket. Its intricate design suggested a purpose beyond simple adornment. It wasn't a pocket watch or any kind of gadget they recognized from the early 20th century. The more they saw, the less they understood. The woman's otherwise placid expression in the original photo now seemed to conceal a deeper secret. Was it a look of calm determination? Or perhaps something else entirely? The team felt an escalating sense of apprehension. The implications of this discovery were starting to surface. What kind of device was this, hidden so carefully by a young woman in 1902? Why was it so important that she had to hide it, yet hold it so tightly? The more data they gathered, the more questions arose, and the more unsettling the whole situation became. It was no longer just an interesting historical find. It was becoming something else, something that felt significant in a way they couldn't yet articulate. The hidden object was a puzzle piece, but they had no idea what picture it belonged to, and that uncertainty was starting to make them nervous. The combined data from both imaging techniques started to paint a clearer, more detailed picture. The object was definitely taking form. It was indeed mechanical, with delicate components, and what looked like precise construction. You could almost make out tiny gears, springs and levers, all packed together in a very confined space. Its size suggested it was small enough to be concealed by the sleeve, yet substantial enough to create the visible bulge. It wasn't flat, it had depth and dimension, and the woman's grip on it, which had been hinted at by the digital magnification, was now clearly discernible. Her fingers were wrapped tightly around it, almost possessively. It wasn't a gentle hold. It looked like she was making sure it wouldn't slip away, or perhaps that no one could take it from her. As the image of the hidden object became clearer, a growing unease settled over the team. This wasn't what they expected. The nature of the object didn't align with any common personal items from that era. It was far too complex for a mere trinket. Its intricate design suggested a purpose beyond simple adornment. It wasn't a pocket watch or any kind of gadget they recognized from the early 20th century. The more they saw, the less they understood. The woman's otherwise placid expression in the original photo now seemed to conceal a deeper secret. Was it a look of calm determination, or perhaps something else entirely? The team felt an escalating sense of apprehension. The implications of this discovery were starting to surface. What kind of device was this, hidden so carefully by a young woman in 1902? Why was it so important that she had to hide it, yet hold it so tightly? The more data they gathered, the more questions arose, and the more unsettling the whole situation became. It was no longer just an interesting historical find. It was becoming something else, something that felt significant in a way they couldn't yet articulate. The hidden object was a puzzle piece, but they had no idea what picture it belonged to, and that uncertainty was starting to make them nervous. Advanced imaging techniques were key to what came next. The photograph was placed under a battery of tests that went beyond simple X-rays. They used a specialized X-ray fluorescence analysis, which could determine elemental composition, and even terahertz imaging, which could penetrate deeper into the materials without damaging the delicate emulsion. These methods were chosen specifically to bypass the surface image and reveal the underlying structure of the hidden item with unprecedented clarity. The goal was to get a complete, three-dimensional understanding of what was inside that sleeve. The X-ray fluorescence confirmed the presence of several metals, including brass, steel, and even trace amounts of what appeared to be silver, all precisely arranged. This wasn't a simple mechanism, it was a carefully crafted piece of engineering. The terahertz imaging, on the other hand, revealed the internal geometry with remarkable detail. It showed tiny, interlocking components, almost like a miniature city of gears and levers. The skeletal outline that the initial X-ray provided now had flesh on its bones. The combined data from these advanced techniques allowed them to create a preliminary 3D reconstruction. This wasn't just a flat image anymore. They could rotate the object virtually, examine it from all angles, and even zoom into its smallest parts. And that's when it became undeniably clear. The object was a miniature, highly complex mechanical device. It was a marvel of precision engineering, especially for 1902. Intricate gears, some no larger than a grain of rice, were meshed together. Tiny springs coiled and levers extended, all working in concert. It was tightly packed, every component seemingly serving a specific, critical function. The construction was meticulous, almost obsessive in its detail. What truly puzzled them was its design. It was unlike any known clockwork or common gadget from the early 20th century. It wasn't a watch, because it lacked a clear face or hands. It wasn't a music box, as there were no obvious sound-producing elements. It wasn't a camera, for it had no lens or film mechanism. It seemed to defy categorization. The precision was there, the mechanical genius was undeniable, but its purpose remained a complete mystery. The woman's grip, now seen in the 3D model, was even more pronounced. Her fingers were not just holding it, they were almost integrated with it, pressing into specific points, as if activating or controlling it. It was an unnerving sight. This growing unease wasn't just about the object itself, but also about the woman holding it. Her placid expression in the original photo began to feel less like composure and more like a mask. The sheer complexity of the device suggested it wasn't a casual accessory. It was something important, something that required a deep understanding to operate, or perhaps to even possess. Its nature simply didn't align with what was considered normal for a young woman in that period. This was not a fashion statement or a common tool. The team started to feel an escalating sense of apprehension. The implications were starting to surface, much like a hidden pattern emerging from a complex weave. This wasn't just a historical oddity, it felt like a secret that the woman in the photo was guarding, holding it close, almost as if it was a part of her. The more they reconstructed the device, the more questions piled up. What was its function? Who made it? And why was it so important that it had to be hidden, yet held so tightly at the moment of her portrait? The placid photograph from 1902 was transforming into a chilling enigma, each new piece of data deepening the mystery and the unsettling feeling that accompanied it. They knew they were on the verge of uncovering something profound, something that would change their understanding of that era, and perhaps even more. The object was a silent challenge, daring them to understand its purpose. The forensic reconstruction from the imaging data finally allowed them to create a full 3D model of the hidden item. It was a painstaking process, piecing together layers of X-ray, infrared, and high-resolution optical scans. What emerged was startling. It was indeed a miniature, highly complex mechanical device, far more intricate than they had initially imagined. The model revealed literally hundreds of tiny components, gears so fine they looked like lace, delicate springs that coiled and uncoiled with invisible tension, and an array of levers and linkages that connected everything in a bewildering dance. This wasn't just precision engineering, it was engineering bordering on art, a level of craftsmanship that seemed almost impossible for the period. Every part seemed custom-made, designed to fit perfectly within its tiny enclosure. The overall shape was somewhat irregular, not a perfect rectangle or circle, but more organic, almost ergonomic, as if designed to be held. What made it truly stand out was its internal logic. It wasn't just a collection of parts, it was a system. The gears didn't just turn, they drove other gears in a sequence that suggested a specific complex operation. The levers weren't just for show, they seemed capable of engaging or disengaging different parts of the mechanism. The team spent weeks just trying to map out the basic flow of its internal workings. It was clear this wasn't a simple mechanism. It was designed to perform a series of operations, perhaps even a continuous one. The theories on its function started to pour in, each one more speculative than the last. Some suggested it was a sophisticated musical box, but there was no evidence of reeds or hammers. Others thought it might be a personal timekeeping device, an incredibly advanced watch, but it lacked any display for time. The idea of an early prototype of a calculating machine was floated, given the complexity, but it didn't seem to have input or output mechanisms in the traditional sense. It was a puzzle that refused to fit into any known category of early 20th century technology. There was an unsettling asymmetry to its design, a deliberate obfuscation. Some parts seemed overly complex for their apparent function, while others appeared almost too simple. It felt like a riddle wrapped in an enigma, its purpose intentionally veiled. Dr. Aris Thorne, the lead expert overseeing the project, kept returning to the feeling that something was fundamentally off about it. It was too perfect, yet too strange, too advanced, yet from a time that shouldn't have produced such a thing. During one of their late-night sessions, a junior researcher, a young woman named Clara, pointed out a subtle, recurring pattern in the device's internal mechanisms. It wasn't immediately obvious, hidden within the complex arrangement of gears and plates, but once she highlighted it, everyone saw it, etched faintly onto several key components, and recurring in the way certain gears interlocked, were symbols, not letters or numbers, but stylized shapes that seemed vaguely familiar, yet utterly out of place in a mechanical device. These weren't decorative flourishes. They were precise, repeated symbols, almost like a code. Clara, who had a background in art history, recognized them as bearing a striking resemblance to ancient occult symbols, specifically those found in obscure alchemical texts and esoteric diagrams. They were barely perceptible at first, almost as if meant to be overlooked, but once seen, they couldn't be unseen. A small sigil here, a stylized glyph there, repeating in a sequence that suggested meaning. This discovery shifted the entire team's perspective. What had started as scientific curiosity quickly morphed into a creeping sense of dread. The object was no longer just a mechanical marvel, it was something far more unsettling. The presence of these symbols, subtle yet undeniable, suggested a purpose far more esoteric and potentially malevolent than anything they had imagined. This wasn't about telling time or playing music. This was about something else entirely. The clean, logical world of mechanics suddenly collided with the shadowy, irrational world of the occult. The implications were profound. If these symbols were what they seemed, then the device wasn't just an advanced piece of engineering. It was a tool, perhaps even an artifact, steeped in practices that society largely dismissed as superstition or myth. Dr. Thorne felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning in the lab. The woman's unyielding grip on the object in the photograph now took on a terrifying new meaning. Was she holding it, or was it holding her? Was it a protector or a prison? The silence in the lab grew heavy, filled with the unspoken questions that now hung in the air. The object seemed to pulse with a hidden energy, even in its digital reconstruction. It was as if they had peeled back a layer of mundane reality to find something ancient and dark lurking beneath. The initial excitement of discovery had been replaced by a profound sense of unease. They were no longer just studying a historical artifact. They were peering into a secret that perhaps should have remained buried. The photograph, once a simple portrait, had become a gateway to a hidden history, a history whispered in symbols and intricate gears. The discovery of the occult symbols within the device made it clear that understanding its purpose required understanding the woman who held it. Dr. Thorne immediately tasked Clara and another researcher, Mark, with the painstaking work of identifying her. This wasn't a simple process. The photograph itself gave few clues beyond the year, 1902, and the general style of dress. They started with general historical archives from the period, focusing on prominent families and known portrait studios, but that was like looking for a needle in a haystack. Their first real break came from a subtle detail in the background of the photograph that had previously been dismissed as artistic license, a distinctive, almost Gothic window frame. Mark, with his background in architectural history, recognized it as a unique style, common to a particular region in New England. This narrowed their search considerably. They then cross-referenced known photographers active in that area around 1902 with family records from the same period. It was a long, tedious process of elimination, sifting through census data, local newspaper announcements, and even old property deeds. Finally, after weeks of dedicated work, a name emerged: Eleanor Vance. She was listed in a local census as residing in a large, isolated estate on the outskirts of a small coastal town. The family name, Vance, appeared in several historical documents, often associated with land ownership and a reputation for being reclusive. They found an old newspaper clipping from 1905, reporting on the sale of the Vance estate after the disappearance of its last known occupant, Eleanor Vance. The article was brief, almost dismissive, but the timing was right. Eleanor would have been in her early 20s when the photo was taken, matching the woman's apparent age. Further digging into local historical societies and dusty town records painted a clearer, though still fragmented, picture of Eleanor. She was indeed from a prominent family, but one that had steadily withdrawn from public life over generations. The family was known for its eccentricities, and whispers of strange practices had always clung to the Vance name. They were often referred to as the Vances of Blackwood, and the name itself seemed to carry a certain weight in the local folklore. Neighbors and distant relatives, interviewed by local historians many years after Eleanor's disappearance, recalled her as a deeply withdrawn individual. She was rarely seen in town, preferring the solitude of the family estate. When she was glimpsed, it was often in the company of peculiar books, their titles hinting at subjects far removed from polite society. Old-timers recounted seeing lights burning late into the night at the Vance Manor, and strange sounds, sometimes described as faint humming or clicking, were occasionally heard drifting from the property. These were often dismissed as the workings of an old house or the imagination of superstitious locals, but in light of the device they now took on a new, unsettling significance. The whispers about the Vance family weren't just about eccentricity. There were darker rumors, tales passed down through generations, stories of the Vances dabbling in spiritualism, not as a parlor game, but with a serious, almost scientific intent. Some spoke of forbidden experiments, attempts to communicate with the dead, or even pacts made with unknown entities. These were the kinds of stories that people usually laughed off, attributing them to rural superstition. But for Dr. Thorne's team, these stories were suddenly terrifyingly relevant. The Vance household, it seemed, had long been viewed with a quiet fear and suspicion by the community, a place where things were done that polite society didn't discuss. With Eleanor's identity established and her family's reputation uncovered, the occult symbols found within the device took on a much deeper, more disturbing meaning. Clara and Mark immediately began cross-referencing the specific symbols with known esoteric societies and forbidden texts that were popular, or at least available, during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. They found a strong correlation. The symbols in the device weren't just generic occult imagery. They were specific, intricate designs found in rare, almost forgotten grimoires and alchemical treatises known to have been studied by certain esoteric groups. More chillingly, some of these texts were rumored to have been part of the Vance family library for generations. This discovery solidified the connection. The device was no longer just an intriguing mechanical oddity. It was a tangible link, a physical manifestation of a hidden, disturbing legacy. It wasn't a coincidence that Eleanor Vance, from a family steeped in such whispered histories, was holding this particular object. The photograph, which had started as a simple historical curiosity, had now become a chilling piece of evidence, a snapshot of a moment deeply intertwined with forbidden knowledge and potentially dangerous practices. The team felt a collective shiver down their spines. They had entered a world far beyond academic research, a world where the lines between science and the supernatural blurred, and the past held secrets that perhaps should never have been disturbed. The object and the woman holding it were not just subjects of study, they were parts of a puzzle whose solution promised to be far more unsettling than any of them could have imagined. What had Eleanor Vance been doing with such a device? What was its true purpose? The questions multiplied, each one more ominous than the last. The experts, now fully immersed in the strange world of the Vance family, brought in specialists to help unravel the device's secrets. Occult historians and symbologists, usually consulted for ancient texts or forgotten rituals, were presented with the reconstructed images of the hidden mechanism. Their initial reactions were a mixture of awe and apprehension. They confirmed that the symbols embedded within the device were far from random. They formed a coherent, albeit fragmented, language. This wasn't some haphazard collection of mystical doodads, it was a deliberate, structured arrangement. The language, as best as they could decipher, pointed towards rituals involving transference, binding, and the manipulation of unseen energies. Words like passage, containment, and resonance appeared in the symbologists' reports, terms that sent shivers down the spines of the research team. This wasn't about telling fortunes or communicating with friendly spirits. This was about power, control, and something far more fundamental and dangerous: The device, with its intricate gears and springs, wasn't just a clockwork marvel. It was a diagram of forbidden knowledge translated into physical form. A leading theory began to solidify, unsettling everyone. The device, they now believed, was not designed for any mundane purpose. It wasn't a fancy music box or an early calculator. It was something far more sinister. The most chilling speculation was that it was a soul trap or a conduit for a non-physical entity. Its intricate mechanics weren't mimicking natural processes. They were believed to be designed to mimic or manipulate metaphysical ones. The gears weren't just turning, they were enacting a ritual, a process to capture or channel something from beyond. This explained the strange, unsettling asymmetry, the deliberate obfuscation in its design that the team had noticed earlier. It wasn't meant to be easily understood by human eyes, but by something else entirely. Eleanor Vance's tight grip on the device in the photograph, once interpreted as protective or even possessive, took on a new and chilling meaning. Was she holding it to protect it or to control the power within? Or, a more terrifying thought, was she struggling to keep something contained, something that was actively trying to escape? The experts considered the possibility that her grip was a desperate attempt to maintain control over a force she had perhaps unleashed, or was in the process of unleashing. Her placid expression in the photo no longer seemed neutral. It now appeared strained, a mask barely concealing an inner struggle. Eleanor herself, once just a subject in an old photograph, was now seen in a completely different light. She was not merely a passive individual posing for a picture. She was an active participant, perhaps even the architect or a key component in the device's terrifying function. Her isolated life, which had previously been explained away as eccentricity, took on a new, much darker meaning. It suggested a life dedicated to forbidden knowledge, to dangerous experiments conducted in secret, far from the prying eyes of a judgmental society. The whispers of her family's dabbling in the occult and their reputation for secrecy now seemed like glaring red flags, warnings that had gone unheeded for generations. The photograph itself transformed entirely. It was no longer a simple portrait, a charming glimpse into a bygone era. It became a chilling snapshot of a hidden, ongoing ritual. The bulge beneath her sleeve wasn't an accident of fabric. It was a tangible sign of the device's presence, and by extension the strange, otherworldly forces at play. Every detail, from the stiffness of her posture to the subtle tension in her hand, suddenly screamed of a deeper, more profound secret. The air around her in the image, though static and monochrome, seemed charged with an unseen energy. The research team, initially driven by academic curiosity, found themselves increasingly disturbed by their findings. They were no longer just historians or scientists. They were uncovering something that felt inherently wrong, something that defied logical explanation and touched upon areas of human knowledge best left undisturbed. The device, with its intricate symbols and its unsettling purpose, was a testament to the Vance family's dark legacy, a legacy that Eleanor had seemingly embraced, or perhaps been consumed by. The questions that had multiplied earlier now coalesced into one terrifying query. What exactly was Eleanor Vance doing with this object, and what consequences had her actions wrought? The answers, they feared, would be far more horrifying than anything they had imagined. They were on the precipice of understanding a truth that might shatter their understanding of the world. The relentless pursuit of truth led the team back to the dusty archives of the Vance estate. They knew there had to be more, something that could explain Eleanor's intense involvement with the device. Their diligent search, fueled by a growing sense of urgency, finally uncovered a hidden compartment in an old, forgotten desk. Inside, nestled amongst brittle letters and dried flowers, lay a leather-bound journal. It was clearly Eleanor's, its pages filled with elegant, yet unsettling, script. The journal was written in a coded language, a mix of arcane symbols and stylized Latin, interspersed with intricate diagrams that chillingly matched the mechanical device they had been studying. Deciphering this journal became the team's new paramount challenge, a task they approached with a mix of dread and fierce determination. They understood that within its pages lay the key to unlocking the full horror of Eleanor's creation and its purpose. The process of decoding was slow and painstaking. Each symbol, each phrase had to be carefully cross-referenced with the occult texts they had identified earlier, and with the diagrams of the device itself. As the journal's secrets began to unravel, a terrifying narrative emerged. The entries detailed Eleanor's gradual descent into an all-consuming obsession. She wrote of her fascination with what she called trans-dimensional mechanics, and her fervent desire to preserve or reclaim a lost loved one. Early entries were filled with a scientific curiosity, albeit one tinged with a dark spiritual undercurrent. She meticulously documented her experiments, her theories on how to bridge the gap between worlds, and her belief that certain frequencies and material configurations could act as anchors for entities beyond human perception. She spoke of her family's legacy, not as a curse, but as a path to power, a hidden knowledge passed down through generations. However, as her work on the device progressed, the tone of the journal shifted dramatically. The initial scientific detachment gave way to something far more frantic and disturbing. The neat script became hurried, the diagrams more chaotic, as if drawn in a state of growing agitation. She began to describe the device not as an inert object, but as something alive. It sang, she wrote, with a low, resonant hum that vibrated through her bones. It whispered to her, offering insights and temptations that blurred the line between her own thoughts and an external influence. These entries hinted at an entity, or perhaps multiple entities, within the device, communicating with her, guiding her, or perhaps subtly manipulating her. Her initial desire to reclaim a loved one seemed to morph into a darker ambition, a yearning for power, or perhaps a desperate attempt to control something that had already grown beyond her grasp. The final entries of the journal were a chilling testament to a desperate struggle. Eleanor's handwriting was almost illegible, scrawled across the pages in a blur of fear and exhaustion. She detailed a growing loss of control, her original intentions twisted and corrupted. The whispers had become demands, the songs had turned into a cacophony of voices. She wrote of nightmares that seeped into her waking hours, of shadows moving in her periphery, and a constant oppressive presence in her home. She spoke of the entity's increasing strength, its attempts to push against the confines of the device, to break free. There was a palpable sense of terror in her words, a profound regret for what she had unleashed, and a desperate, failing struggle to contain it. The journal ended abruptly, mid-sentence, leaving the reader with a terrifying cliffhanger, a silent scream frozen in time. With the journal's revelations, the device's true nature was finally laid bare. It was not a soul trap for human spirits, as initially speculated. Instead, it was a containment vessel, a prison meticulously crafted to hold something far more ancient and predatory. Eleanor's original intent, however noble or misguided, had been twisted beyond recognition. The entity, or entities, within the device had begun to exert their will, subtly at first, then with increasing force, manipulating her actions, her thoughts, and ultimately her very being. It became clear that the photograph, the one taken in 1902, captured a pivotal and terrifying moment. The bulge beneath Eleanor's sleeve was not merely the device itself, it was the entity, energized by Eleanor's unwitting actions, pushing against the fabric, straining against its mechanical prison, attempting to break free, to manifest fully in the physical world. The placid expression on Eleanor's face was now understood as a mask of unimaginable strain, a desperate effort to maintain composure, while an unseen horror wrestled for control just inches from her skin. The photograph was no longer a historical curiosity. It was a snapshot of a battle, a silent scream from the past, warning of a malevolent force barely contained. The team felt a cold dread settle over them, realizing the full implications of what they had uncovered. The device, still hidden within the seemingly innocent photograph, was now understood for what it truly was, a dormant prison for a malevolent entity. The research team, having pieced together Eleanor's journal and the advanced imaging data, found themselves facing a terrifying ethical dilemma. The photograph, once a simple historical artifact, had become a ticking time bomb, a silent threat. What should they do with it? Destroying the picture, the physical manifestation of the device's containment, felt like an incredibly risky gamble. If the entity was truly imprisoned within its intricate mechanisms, then shattering its physical shell might just release it, unleashing an ancient horror upon an unsuspecting world. But preserving it, keeping it in existence, meant housing a dangerous artifact, a constant reminder of a power they barely understood and certainly couldn't control. The thought of it falling into the wrong hands, or simply activating on its own, sent shivers down their spines. The photograph had been moved to a secure, climate-controlled vault, its existence known only to a select few. Every glance at the young woman's face, now imbued with such dark knowledge, was a chilling reminder of the heavy burden they carried. Eleanor Vance's ultimate fate remained ambiguous, a haunting question mark at the end of her terrifying journal. Her final, frantic entries suggested a desperate struggle, a losing battle against the entity she had inadvertently invited into her life. Did she succumb to its will, becoming an empty vessel for its dark purpose? Was she consumed, her life force drained to fuel its malevolent existence? Or did she, in a final, desperate act of defiance, manage to reseal the device, sacrificing herself to keep the horror contained? The journal offered no clear answers, only fragments of a mind unraveling under immense pressure. Her story, however, served as a potent and chilling cautionary tale. It was a stark warning against unchecked ambition, the seductive allure of forbidden knowledge, and the perilous consequences of meddling with forces beyond human comprehension. Eleanor, a recluse seeking to reclaim a lost loved one, had instead stumbled upon a truth far more profound and terrifying than she could have imagined. Her quiet life, once dismissed as mere eccentricity, now resonated with a tragic, dangerous purpose. The photograph itself, once a mundane portrait, was now imbued with a chilling presence, a silent testament to a dark pact, a moment frozen in time where human will clashed with something ancient and unyielding. It was a picture of a woman, but it was also a portrait of a prison. The implications of such a device existing, even in 1902, were staggering. It suggested a hidden history, a secret world where occult technology was not just myth, but a tangible, dangerous reality. It hinted at entities and forces beyond human comprehension, lurking just beneath the surface of everyday life. The discovery opened a terrifying window into a world where the veil between dimensions was thin, easily breached by those with enough knowledge or enough desperation. The team, once composed of skeptical academics and scientists, now faced a profound shift in their understanding of reality. Their scientific instruments had revealed not just a mechanical wonder, but a gateway to something ancient and terrifying. The world, they realized, was far less mundane than they had ever believed. The final image in their minds, and for anyone who learned the true story of the photograph, was of that single black and white print. It was now stored in a high-security, undisclosed location deep within a vault designed to contain not just physical objects, but the secrets they held. It was forever watched, its secrets still whispering from the past, a constant silent reminder of the thin line between this world and the next. The placid face of Eleanor Vance, captured in 1902, continued to gaze out, her secret held tight within her grasp, a silent guardian of the immense power she had unwittingly awakened. The photograph, once just a curiosity, had become a responsibility, a burden, and a chilling testament to the unseen horrors that lie just beyond our perception, waiting for an opportunity to break free. The world remained largely unaware, blissfully ignorant of the ancient predatory force that had once strained against the fabric of a young woman's sleeve, and which still lay dormant, waiting.